You're listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 14th of August 2024 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist, in association with UBS. Hello, this is The Globalist, broadcasting to you live from Midori House in London. I'm Georgina Godwin. On the show ahead...
Bold, brilliant, beautiful. Keep it up. Putin started this. Kick his ass.
US Senator Lindsey Graham there, reacting to Kyiv's incursion into Russia. We'll ask if this could change the outcome of the war. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas meets his opposite number in Turkey today. We'll examine his agenda. Then...
Every extended family in the West Bank relies on jobs inside Israel and inside the settlements, much higher paying jobs, for their survival.
We hear from Pulitzer-winning author Nathan Thrall about the realities of living in the West Bank. We'll get the lowdown on culture wars in Slovakia, have a rustle through the papers and a roundup of arts news. And then we'll hear all about the digital partnership between Ukraine's largest literature festival, Lviv Book Forum, and leading charity and international ideas platform, Hey Festival Global. That's all ahead here on The Globalist, live from London. First, a look at what else is happening in the news. The United States has approved the sale of $20 billion worth of fighter jets and other military equipment to Israel, although the Pentagon says deliveries would not begin for years. Venezuelan opposition leader Maria Corina Machado says that President Nicolas Maduro has entrenched himself with the nation's top military leaders in order to stay in power after last month's disputed election. And Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida will step down in September, ending a 3-year term marred by political scandals and paving the way for a new premier to address the impact of rising prices. Do stay tuned to Monocle Radio throughout the day for more on those stories. Now, on August the 6th, Ukrainian forces launched a surprise attack on the Kursk region in Russia, around 30 kilometres inside the country. The attack, which was only confirmed by Volodymyr Zelensky on Saturday, began in the town of Sudza, 530 kilometres from Moscow. Sudza has the only pumping station that delivers Russian natural gas to Europe through Ukraine. Now, Russia's evacuated civilians in border cities and declared a state of emergency in Kursk. More than a week later, Ukraine now controls at least 1,000 square kilometres of Russian territory. And now there are reports that Russia's had to pull troops out of Ukraine to fend off the attack. Well, I'm joined by Mark Galeotti, who's a political analyst and the author of Putin's Wars from Chechnya to Ukraine, and down the line from Kyiv by the security analyst Maria Avdiva. Maria, if we could start with you, many thanks for joining us. How did this attack on the Kursk region unfold?
This happened unexpectedly to everyone, and just now we start to get pieces of information claiming that even the top military leadership knew about the attack and was preparing just several days before it started. So everything was kept very secretly, and it came very surprisingly for Ukrainians as well. We had already seen several over-border attacks in Belgorod region. So at first it was unclear how the situation will unfold, and will it be something like we have seen before, a smaller attack that ended up quickly. But then it turned out to be very substantially different. And now everyone is watching what's happening in Kursk region, and President Zelensky several times already delivered overview of what's happening in Russian territory. Yesterday, General Syrsky reported that Ukraine has pushed even deeper, and now it's more than 70 settlements under Ukrainian control, and Ukraine started what is called a humanitarian operation on the territories that are currently controlled by Ukrainian troops, meaning they supply humanitarian aid and give aid to Russian civilian population that did not evacuate and stays in the territories where Ukrainian troops have control over.
Mark, if I could bring you in here, what has Russia said about it, and why was the country so unprepared for the attack?
Well, to handle that last point first, I mean, what seems to be the case is the Russians did have some inkling that there would be an attack. But as Maria said, there has been past raids, and they have just been little raids, essentially sort of rushing in, taking a village, taking a bit of video, and then quite quickly sort of pulling back, so more for political purposes than anything else. So I think they had a sense that it may be something like this, and therefore they were unaware that actually what was happening was it was going to be a full-scale attack by some of Ukraine's best troops, fully mechanized. And that therefore creates a problem for how the Russian state reacts in terms of how it talks about it. On the whole, Putin has been trying to downplay this, which I think is a political mistake, but there you go, he didn't ask me. The very fact that he's actually sort of mobilized what's called the counter-terrorism operation, which is a kind of martial law type sort of situation in Kursk and neighboring regions, and actually has given responsibility for overall coordination, not to the military, but to the Federal Security Service, the internal security forces. So, he's still trying to play this as if it's much less serious than it really is. And that, of course, stands at odds with the sight of over 100,000 people already displaced and further border regions being evacuated just in case.
Maria, there are Ukrainian reports that Russia's had to pull out troops from Ukraine to counter this offensive. What more do we know about that?
Well, we do not have any a lot of information about what's happening on the battlefield because everything is kept very low level in terms of giving out the information. So we get pieces of information from Russian military bloggers and what's put on the media by Ukrainian military command. So I think that the idea is to make the front line longer for Russia and actually admit for Russian that this is another front line where they have to regroup troops. But what's happening on the ground, I think, even saying, looking at the number of POWs that Ukraine is able to capture, that Russian units do not act in a unified and coordinated manner. And this is more the troops that Russia had in reserve, that the troops that they are redeploying from other frontline areas, because basically they continue their offensive in Donetsk, in Pokrovsk region, where there is one of the main goals to get closer to the main Ukrainian infrastructural hub in that region. So we will see how the situation unfolds, and the hope is that the development in Kursk will actually push Russia to bring more troops from the other frontline areas.
And is Ukraine bracing for reprisal attacks? I know you're in Kherson, and there's been there've been fresh attacks in that area overnight.
Well, Kherson is on the south of Ukraine. It's just across the border from where the Russian troops so just across the river from where the Russian troops are. So Kherson and other areas, Ukrainian cities, which are on the front line, are constantly under Russian attacks. Russia never stops it. So there is no point in saying that there are any retaliation strikes for Ukrainian strategy, because actually there is also no point to say we should not do that and that not to provoke Putin, because from the very start of the war, Putin is using every single weapon they have, not stopped by or by any provocations. The only country and person which are escalating is Putin and Russia. So they have already used everything and hit every kind of civilian target on Ukrainian territory. So nothing that Ukraine can do will actually provoke Putin, because he just is now desperate to find the solution for this situation. And as Mark has noted in his speaking with military top leadership, Putin looks really weak and helpless. Looks like they don't have any strategy at the moment.
But what is Ukraine's strategy? Why did Ukraine carry out the attack? And what is the plan? Do we know, Maria?
Well, you see that Kursk turned out to be really successful, because this is the area where Russia waited at least for this attack. So putting these troops into Donetsk region just to face Russian advance might be not as successful, because now Ukraine has a leverage, because now Ukraine has something that it has gained, and that shows how weak Russia is, and that Ukraine still has strengths that can be used during the negotiations and possible talks later in the autumn. And also this shows how corrupt and weak Russian system is, because there were nothing that actually stopped Ukrainian advance in Kursk region, and now Russia's response is insufficient, and they can't find any solution to how to protect their own population in that area. So I think that Ukraine had several goals in mind, and they are very successfully achieved.
And Mark, finally, by one estimate, Ukraine seized more Russian territory in a week than Russia's captured in Ukraine in this whole calendar year. I wonder if this attack on the Kursk region could change the course of the war.
Well, look, we have to be cautious about this notion of control. Very much the Ukrainian strategy has been a rush. So, if need be, bypassing small concentrations of Russian forces, zooming along the main highways. So the result is it's actually quite a messy picture. And those neat maps we see sometimes online showing control areas don't really convey that. So let's be cautious about just how tight the Ukrainian control is on this area, because we haven't seen the kind of follow-on forces, the reinforcements, to really consolidate that. But in terms of the wider impact on the war, 2 points really. One is, absolutely, if it does force the Russians to step down their assaults in the Donbass region, which is clearly part of Kyiv's ambitions, then that definitely will more or less mean that for this year, the Russians have pretty much culminated. They will have become exhausted. So far, at least, though, they're still pressing ahead. And the second way it'll influence the war is precisely political. It's encouraged Ukrainians, but it's also, I think, helped change the narrative in the West. There was a growing sense of Ukraine fatigue, a sense that, in fact, Ukraine can't win. Now this is at least being, combated by a sense that actually Ukraine can still pull rabbits out of the hat, and it's not just simply a case of raw arithmetic about the fact that Russia is almost 4 times as large a country as Ukraine, and therefore will eventually grind Ukraine down. So that actually is in some ways the most important element, the political.
Mark, thank you very much indeed. That was Russia analyst Mark Galeotti and Ukrainian security analyst Maria Avdiva. Thanks to them both. This is The Globalist. It's 9:13 in Istanbul and 7:13 here in London. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas is due to arrive in Turkey today for a 2-day trip aimed at addressing escalating tensions in the region. He'll meet with the Turkish leader Erdogan and address the Turkish parliament on Thursday. Well, I'm joined now from Istanbul by the journalist Ruth Michelson. Ruth, many thanks for coming back on the show. What prompted this invitation to Abbas? What's the relationship between Abbas and Erdogan?
I mean, Abbas and Erdogan certainly have something of a more strained relationship than we've seen Erdogan has had with members of Hamas in the past, so Abbas's rivals. But we know that this visit was arranged around the time that there was discussion of the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu addressing the US Congress. And so there's the invitation for Abbas not just to come back to Turkey and to meet with Erdogan, which has happened at least twice since the 7th of October, but to address the parliament. There's a sense that this visit highly symbolic, is supposed to be a kind of response or mirroring of Netanyahu's very warm welcome and standing ovation that he got at Congress in Washington.
So the trip comes in the wake of Hamas political leader Ismail Haniyeh's assassination on July the 31st in an airstrike in Tehran, heightening the risk of a wider regional war. Will keeping regional peace be high on their agenda?
I mean, I think there's certainly plenty written in the Turkish media that says that, there will be discussion about of the ceasefire negotiations, even though we know that Hamas will not be attending the talks that are scheduled for tomorrow in Doha, in Qatar. So these things will be discussed. The issue is that both Erdogan and certainly Abbas are not parties that necessarily have a huge amount of influence over whether a peace deal gets signed. I mean, Abbas is someone that we see have a huge role in terms of representing the Palestinian people, the Palestinian state internationally at regional conferences to talk about the need for a ceasefire. But he's not somebody that we see being active or having a lot of influence on the ground at home. I mean, there was a survey from the Palestinian Center for Policy and Survey Research, that came out last month that said that only 12% of people across Palestinian territories are satisfied with Abbas's performance. Dissatisfaction, 85%, and 90% of people, of his citizens, want him to resign. So he is someone that can carry the message and say, look, there needs to be a ceasefire. This is what is in the interest. But it's not necessarily a message that people at home say that he is the best messenger for.
So, I mean, I know that last month Fatah, Abbas-led Fatah and Hamas agreed in Beijing to form a government together in the latest attempt at resolving this long-standing rivalry that you referred to. And that, of course, looms over any potential vision for the rule of Gaza after the war with Israel. Where does Turkey stand on this?
Well, Turkey, for a long time, has provided a huge amount of aid and funding in Gaza. Traditionally, they've been seen as slightly more aligned with Hamas. But we've also seen, for example, that Turkey has long-standing concerns about Jerusalem that they're likely to express because of the recent events that we've seen at the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound, for example, yesterday. So Turkey is, the kind of public statements that we're likely to see are probably things that are very in parallel with what we saw from Abbas's visit to Moscow that he's just concluded, and then he'll be flying here, which was where he told Putin that he appreciated his great friendship with the Palestinian people. These are the kind of statements that are likely to anger Israeli officials, but they're not necessarily going to translate to anything concrete in the long term in terms of planning.
What role is Turkey playing in trying to secure a ceasefire in the region, and is an end to the conflict actually in Erdogan's interests?
I mean, Turkey has for some time shown that it really likes to present itself as a kind of regional diplomat, a big regional player that can host peace talks. We've seen that they hosted talks between Russia and Ukraine over the grain deal, over hostage negotiations that recently freed a Wall Street Journal reporter. But on this issue, Erdogan has made a series of pretty fiery statements on Israel since October 7th, and so has really, despite the fact that Erdogan and Turkey love to play this diplomatic role, this isn't really an area where they've really been allowed to get a foothold in this, and the negotiations have really been focused in Doha and in Cairo. And although we've seen Erdogan express support for the idea of a ceasefire, and it's certainly something that he says he wants, in the end, the kind of diplomatic punch that we're seeing is coming from other parts of the region.
Although he is delivering a lot in humanitarian aid.
Absolutely. So, I mean, there's been a huge push by the Turkish state and also entities that maybe have some connection to the Turkish state to ship enormous amounts of aid over into Arish in Gaza and to truck them into Gaza, although that has become incredibly difficult, borderline impossible, since the Israeli forces took Rafah. But at the same time, this is something that the Turkish state and Erdogan have been focused on for some time, is the supply of aid into Gaza, and to a lesser degree into parts of the West Bank and into Jerusalem.
Ruth, thank you very much indeed. That's Ruth Michelson in Istanbul with, once again, her astute analysis of the situation. Now, still to come on the programme. Slovakia's National Theatre becomes the centre of protests as the government fires its director. This is The Globalist.
UBS has over 900 investment analysts from over 100 different countries.
Over 900 of the sharpest minds and freshest thinkers in the world of finance today.
To find out how we could help you,
contact us at ubs.com.
Now let's continue with today's newspapers, and joining me from Zurich, the other GG, it is Gorana Gurgit, who is a senior researcher with the Swiss and Euro-Atlantic Security Team at the ETH Zurich Centre for Security Studies. Gorana, good morning to you.
Morning, and great to be in the GG sort of squared, or G2 power of 4, I guess.
G2 power, absolutely. Let's talk about this big story coming out of Japan. Kishida has bowed out as party leader. He doesn't actually go until September, but this is it for him.
Yeah, that's the sort of, I guess, the breaking news in terms of sort of what's going on at the helm of one of the most important economies in the world. So just overnight, what we've heard out of Japan is that their prime minister will bow down in September, and in that way end his 3-year term as the head of Japan's government. And this is quite significant because actually we've seen him obviously step into the role after the tragic assassination of the former Prime Minister Abe, and in a way ushering in a sort of period of relative sort of calm, I would say, in terms of what's going on at the top of Japan's politics, and now bringing in fears that we might see again a sort of revolving door in Japan when it comes to who their governmental leaders will be. But I guess from my perspective, what I've been looking at most closely here is the fact that we've seen Japan really, fortify its role and propel itself as one of the critical U.S. allies in the Indo-Pacific. Fumio Kishida has been basically the prime minister that Biden administration has relied on a lot in making this whole plan of bridging allies and connecting allies across the Indo-Pacific, but also between the Euro-Atlantic and Indo-Pacific, really kind of a crucial part of that whole puzzle, the sort of historic breakthroughs in terms of Japan and Korea relations. So with end of his tenure, it's yet to be seen whether this sort of momentum is going to be sustained.
And it's really this fundraising scandal as well as rising prices that had brought him down.
Correct. So as far as all the reports go, I'm not a Japanese speaker, but I rely on the sort of papers of record and sort of the what we've seen now in reports is the sort of sense that Japanese public has really grown increasingly disenchanted with his leadership amid these revelations about the Liberal Democratic Party, of which he's the leader, its ties to this controversial Unification Church, and political donations that were made at party fundraising events. And of course, on top of that, something that we've seen all across the board board, I would say, across the sort of political West, if you wish, discontent over the rising costs of living and basically inability of real wages to keep pace with inflation.
Let's move on to this story from the Financial Times, which is deeply alarming. It's about Russia and targeting Europe with nuclear-capable missiles.
Correct. So this is a story that broke yesterday on FT, and it's actually part of a bigger report that the Financial Times has been reporting on already earlier in the year, but now there are additional files that have come out into the public. And this is something that also, makes me wonder as well in the context of the story that you've covered in terms of Ukrainian incursion into Kursk region, the fact that this is a very unexpected sort of development in the ongoing war that Russia started against Ukraine, that now we see these documents come out, which, to some might seem as kind of an effort on part of Russia in terms of kind of counterintelligence, if you wish, to just show how Russia in the period between 2008 and 2014 was basically conducting various sort of plans or making plans that would have the Russian Navy train for potential nuclear strikes as far and deep into Western Europe, but also including in some of its now sort of very close partners and allies like China and Iran. So essentially, the Russian military was instructed to draw up plans to target a number of cities worldwide.
But in fact, these plans are now 10 years old. I mean, a lot has probably changed since 2014.
Sure. And that's why I'm saying it's kind of interesting that this story breaks at this moment. And I think it just makes this sort of point about, Russian efforts as well in sort of making or signaling actually that it does possess these capabilities. I mean, again, it's nothing that's inconsistent with some of the assessments that NATO has made before about the potential Russian capabilities, about the change of its military doctrine, in specific its nuclear doctrine, right, where it's treating now these tactical nuclear weapons as something that is part of the mix, actually sort of breaking these taboos that once upon a time were truly, something that would be unthinkable in the context of conventional warfare. But it is actually, again, I think it's quite significant that this story is breaking at this particular moment when we do see Russian regime actually really being stunned at the pace and the scale that Ukrainians have been able to gain over in that part of Russia around Kursk region.
And finally, a trio of stories that all involve the leader of the axis of resistance, if you want to call them that, that is Iran. Let's start with this email hack of a senior official, of Roger Stone.
Correct. So this is the sort of, I guess, the nexus of U.S. politics, Iran, Middle East wars, and so on. So we've already heard reports over the past couple of days that basically, allegedly, Iranian hackers have been behind these attempts to do various things that would basically breach the integrity of, email systems of the Trump campaign, in some cases succeeding, as in this case of bringing basically or getting themselves access into Roger Stone, who is one of Donald Trump's sort of, longest kind of allies in terms of his involvement in the 2016 campaign, but even before that, managing to actually breach his email account and, again, using that to try to target the Trump and Vance campaign. And so it again resonates a lot, and it kind of rhymes with 2016 when we've had attempts, and again successful ones at that, by the Russian hackers who managed to breach Hillary Clinton's campaign, right, and get into emails of some of her closest associates, like John Podesta, for instance. And so now the question is, of course, what has the broader sort of US body politic learned from this, and what are sort of the intents of these actors? And ultimately, what we see is that it's more about sowing discord rather than pressing the thumb, on either side of the scale, because the idea here is to actually do things that are ultimately damaging for democracy rather than necessarily advocating on part of any particular campaign.
The US, of course, is desperately worried about retaliation from Iran on Israel and have rushed firepower to the Middle East. Tell us more about that.
Yes, so what we've seen over the past couple of days, obviously, is a lot of intelligence reports from mostly the United States, but also some of the allied states that are bracing for a potential strike from Iran as Iran's response to the assassination of one of Hamas's leaders in Tehran just last month. So the US has deployed additional naval assets into the region, hoping that this sort of sends a deterrence signal. It has also just overnight authorized additional weapons sales to Iran, even though, of course, this will still take some years to be transferred to Israel, but all in a way to show Iran that there will be a response, and to try to signal that Iran should not do that. Actually, again, overnight, we've heard from the White House, specifically from President Biden, that if there was some meaningful progress between Israel and Hamas when it comes to these ceasefire negotiations, which at the moment seem to be kind of going nowhere, but if there was some sort of breakthrough, that he believes that Iran could actually scrap these plans to strike Israel. Again, we are now talking about a sort of escalation that would be much greater than what we've seen so far, even though we've seen now, obviously, this conflict kind of spreading in terms of its vectors and different actors being involved. And Iran, of course, not for the first time now, would be launching some missiles towards Israel. But again, there is a fear that this could be a kind of, again, one of these points of greater sort of escalation and potentially no return for some time.
Gorana, thank you very much for that. That's Gorana Gergich speaking to us from our Zurich studio. Now, here's what else we're keeping an eye on today. The United States has approved the sale of $20 billion worth of fighter jets and other military equipment to Israel, although the Pentagon said deliveries would not begin for years. Washington, which is facing mounting domestic and international criticism for its military support of Israel, said it's vital to US national interests to assist Israel to develop and maintain a strong and ready self-defense capability. Venezuelan opposition leader Maria Corina Machado says that President Nicolas Maduro has entrenched himself with the nation's top military leaders in order to stay in power after last month's disputed election. Machado called on Venezuelans at home and abroad to protest on Saturday to force Maduro to respect the election result. And Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida will step down in September, ending a 3-year term marred by political scandals and paving the way for a new premier to address the impact of rising prices. His decision to quit triggers a contest to replace him as boss of the Liberal Democratic Party, the LDP, and by extension as the leader of the world's 4th biggest economy. This is The Globalist. Stay tuned. It's 9:33 in Jerusalem, 7:33 here in London. Nathan Thrall is a Pulitzer Prize-winning American author, essayist and journalist. He spent a decade at the International Crisis Group, where he was director of the Arab-Israeli Project. His latest book, A Day in the Life of Abed Salama, was named Best Book of the Year by The New Yorker, Time, The Economist and 15 other publications. It also won the Pulitzer Prize for General Non-Fiction this year. The book is set in the West Bank, and Thrall, who knows the territory intimately, paints a masterful picture of the politics of occupation and protest. Well, I asked him how he'd seen the West Bank change since October the 7th.
It's changed dramatically. The restrictions on movement are as great as they have ever been. Some people say greater than they have ever been. It takes now hours to travel distances that just a year ago took a half an hour. As a result of those restrictions on movement, coupled with huge spike in violence from Israeli settlers and the Israeli army, means that people are not leaving their immediate surroundings. And so I have met with Palestinians who, have family, let's say a half an hour away, who used to visit all the time. And those family members have seen one another once since October 7th because it's so difficult or dangerous for them to visit one another. Over 600 Palestinians have been killed in the West Bank since October 7th. There has been a huge expansion of settlements and land expropriation in the West Bank, levels we haven't seen in decades. And the number of Palestinians who are unemployed because, every extended family in the West Bank relies on jobs inside Israel and inside the settlements, much higher paying jobs, for their survival. And those have disappeared, almost all disappeared since October 7th. So people are feeling choked in terms of their movement. They are feeling economically constricted. They are fearful for their safety and their lives. The number of Israeli raids inside Palestinian cities and towns. And Israel is using forms of violence in the West Bank that it had not used for a long time since the Second Intifada. Now it is using some of the methods like drones and aerial bombings that it had reserved only for Gaza in the past. And the level of forced displacement, more than 1,000 Palestinians in the 6 weeks after October 7th alone were forcibly displaced. Entire communities have been eradicated. So the conditions in the West Bank are dire.
And for you, a Jewish man living in Jerusalem who has written so much about life in the West Bank and has been so supportive of the Palestinian cause, how are you perceived on both sides?
Among Israeli Jews, I am, I'm not Israeli, I'm an American journalist living in Jerusalem, but among Israeli Jews, I am perceived to be just outside the conversation, outside the real conversation that's happening among Israelis. The conversation among Israelis is not about have a future with equality between the Palestinians and Israelis under Israeli control. It's about how to maintain the system of control, how to ensure, as Netanyahu has said, that Palestinians are never going to control their own borders. To be among that small group that is talking about Palestinian human rights, that's talking about the flattening of Gaza and the lives of Palestinians in Gaza, is just to be totally outside the main Israeli conversation. Among Palestinians, I think I'm, you'd have to ask them how they regard me, but I would hope that they see me as somebody who is helping to spread awareness of their plight.
What would they like to see? How do they want this resolved?
It very much depends. Like every society, there are many different political ideas, and there are members of the Palestinian Authority, for example, who are working hand in glove with Israel and maintaining this system of occupation. There are others who would like to see a single state with equality for all from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea, the territory currently under Israel's control, and all kinds of different variants within that. But the bottom line is every Palestinian wants to have freedom and liberty and self-determination.
In your book, A Day in the Life of Abed Salama, you talk a lot about culture, about quite a macho culture, quite a masculine way of looking at things, and also a way of life that's perhaps driven by family feuds, by rivalry. And I just wondered if you could unpick that for us slightly and tell us how that might have any kind of bearing on what's happening there now.
Well, I think that this might be a bit of a tangent, but I think that what you're talking about now are divisions among Palestinians, and those are very real. They're also cultivated by Israel. One of the key aspects of the Israeli system of control is fragmentation, and Israel achieves that in all kinds of different ways. It achieves it with a permit system. It achieves it with walls and checkpoints. It achieves it by preventing Palestinians from unifying and from being together, and restricting the movement of Gazans to the West Bank and West Bankers to Gaza. And so also at the local level, Israel will try to find collaborators that it can work with in any given community. And this, of course, also creates enormous divisions and suspicion. And then there are just normal family rivalries that exist in any place. So in a way, I would look at it almost in the opposite way, which is it's so remarkable that Palestinians have maintained the kind of social cohesion that they have, the kind of unity that they have in the face of these tremendous obstacles, in the face of an occupying power that is able to go to any individual in a given town and say, wouldn't you like to have a higher paying job inside of Israel? We can arrange for that to happen. Wouldn't you like your mother to get the cancer treatment that she needs at a superior Israeli hospital? We can make that happen.
What do you think is going to happen?
I see no political solution on the horizon. And the reason for that is very simple. There is a huge disparity in power between the two sides. Israel has virtually all of it. Palestinians have virtually none of it. And so the real question is about incentives for Israel, which, as you see in the book, has all the cards. And Israel has basically three options in front of it. One, give Palestinians citizenship and equality, in which case Israel ceases to be a Jewish state, and 99% of Israelis are opposed to that. Two, give the Palestinians a sovereign state on 22% of their homeland, as the PLO, the Palestinian National Movement, has demanded for decades now. And three is to continue the status quo, to give them neither citizenship nor sovereignty, to tell the world that this is a temporary occupation, that it's unfortunate, that it's really the Palestinians' fault that they continue to be occupied, and meanwhile to expand Israeli Jewish settlements, expand measures of de facto annexation of the territory under Israel's control, of the occupied territory, and to constrict Palestinians into tighter and tighter spaces, like the walled enclave of Anata.
That was Nathan Thrall. His book, A Day in the Life of Abed Salama, is out now in paperback. It's published by Penguin, and you can hear a much longer interview with Nathan on Meet the Writers in early September. It's 8:39 in Bratislava and also in Zurich. Now, Slovakia is in the midst of a culture war. The already divided country is facing an increase in tensions since the election of Robert Fico as Prime Minister last year and appears to be heading towards authoritarianism. After the disbanding of the National Crime Agency and the dismantling of the public broadcaster, the latest skirmish is over the sacking of the directors of both the National Theatre and the National Gallery. Well, Lukáš Ondorčanin is head of the foreign news at Slovak daily SME. Lukáš, many thanks for joining us on the show. Why do some Slovakians feel the country's heading back to the communist authoritarian past?
Good morning. So we've seen since the elections in autumn several steps taken by the government of Robert Fico that are going the same direction as Hungary was going or is still going under Viktor Orban. Which is limiting freedom of press, limiting freedom of gathering in the streets, freedom of protest. And we've seen, especially in the past weeks and months, a huge cultural war against maybe Western progressive forces, as they would say it. So you could see quite a lot of steps taken by this government that they will push something that might limit freedoms of people and push aside free media, let's say.
Tell us now about the sacking of these two high-profile artistic directors. Why has this been done by the culture minister?
Well, the culture minister, Martina Šimkovičová, who was a former TV presenter, is pushing her new strategy that is emphasizing that Slovak culture is the only one that should be presented, and she's rejecting these Western progressive values. And these two people, the head of National Gallery and the National Theatre, are apparently, according to her, going against this strategy. They were both quite respected. Both institutions were working very well in past years and months. The National Gallery was reconstructed in the past years, and the reconstruction was seen as one of the very successful projects. But the minister, she didn't even give any particular reasons why they are dismissed. For example, she said that there is not Slovak flag in the National Gallery, or that the head of National Theatre is preferring foreign opera singers over Slovak singers. So these are just small steps, but we see that the culture institutions and people are standing against that. Yesterday, there was a second big protest in Bratislava. Around 80,000 people came during summer, 36 degrees Celsius. So still, you can see that people and the society care about culture.
And I mean, is that indicative that progressive Slovakia does have a hope of pushing back against Fico and his authoritarianism?
Well, unfortunately, they are just one bigger opposition party, but even if we have early elections, I'm not sure if they have enough support to create a government. So you can clearly see this division between more conservative, nationalistic, and somehow maybe pro-Russian ideas. And on the other hand, these liberal forces that are mostly based in Bratislava and bigger cities in Slovakia. So it's quite difficult to see if they can succeed elsewhere in other towns or villages.
And just looking at the minister herself, I mean, I gather she doesn't even live in the country.
Well, actually, she already said that she's moving back to Slovakia. It's quite common to say that many people in Bratislava, they live in the villages on the borders. So she was living in Kyiv in Austria. And that was one of the jokes that many people would say, that the culture minister, who is always talking about Slovak values, is not even living in Slovakia. But she said that she was pushed by the activists, by all the criticism, and she will move back to Slovakia very soon. But yes, this is also showing how she's acting, and she is not very respected by basically anybody in the culture institutions.
Lukáš, thank you very much indeed. That was Lukáš Ondorčanin of the Slovak daily SME. This is The Globalist on Monocle Radio.
UBS is a global financial services firm with over 150 years of heritage. Built on the unique dedication of our people, we bring fresh thinking and perspective to our work. We know that it takes a marriage of intelligence and heart to create lasting value for our clients. It's about having the right ideas, of course, but also about having one of the most accomplished systems and an unrivaled network of global experts. That's why at UBS, we pride ourselves on thinking smarter to make a real difference. Tune in to The Bulletin with UBS every week for the latest insights and opinions from UBS all around the world.
It's time now to talk art news with Ben Luke, who's contributing editor at the Art newspaper and presenter of its podcast. He joins me here in studio. Thank you. We always love somebody who gets up early and makes the effort to come here.
Always a pleasure, thank you.
And it makes such a difference when you're talking to somebody who you know isn't wearing their pyjamas.
That's a good point.
Let's talk about Caspar Koenig, an enormously influential curator. He's died.
Yeah, he's 80. He was 80. Yeah, just incredibly influential. Most people listening to this won't know who he is, but he was, for the past 5 decades, so instrumental in so much of what we now see as contemporary art. He, in 1968, for instance, he co-curated the first ever major survey of Andy Warhol's work in Europe at the Moderna Museet in Stockholm. He also did a Klaus Oldenburg show there. But he's probably most famous for a 10-yearly exhibition in Münster in Germany, basically taking over this town with sculpture. And the roll call of artists that he brought to Münster, which after all is not the great art world centre, it's not New York, it's not London, you know. He brought them there and they created extraordinary works in the town for the people. And I've been lucky enough to speak to Koenig in the past, and also I think really importantly to artists he worked with, and the reverence with which they spoke of him, the way that he conjured from them the best of their efforts was really palpable. They loved working with him. He was really tough by all accounts, you know. He really pushed them, said so many artists think it's really easy to be an artist. Actually, it's hard, and I want to make sure that they are working as hard as they possibly can to deliver for the public. And so he was this extraordinary figure that really did conjure the most from artists, and they loved him for it. And, you know, when you talk to artists about what their best experiences of making art, if they've done Münster, it's often absolutely at the top of the list.
Yeah, and of course he was a great personal collector too. His massive collection is going up for auction.
That's right. So he already donated some of his collection to the Museum Ludwig in Cologne, and then there's an auction coming up on the 1st and 2nd of October, I think it is, of other works. But his son, Johann Koenig, who's a dealer, spoke about how at home that he'd be sort of walking playing football among Franz West furniture and encore Ara works on the wall, and so he was just surrounded by art. And I think that's the thing. It's that I would imagine that he didn't really have to buy much of the art he had in his collection, because he was just working with these artists on a day-to-day basis, and they would have given them to him. And that's another sort of representation of just how much artists loved him and revered his connection to their work.
Now, I've had several issues with this next story. One, is a museum of ice cream in fact art? And is the fact that a man sprained his ankle there news?
This is it. The Art newspaper reports on museums. Is the Museum of Ice Cream a museum? It claims to have 14, and I quote them, magical playscapes. It's my idea of pure hell, I have to say. But anyway, yes, it's a very, very popular museum in New York, in Soho in New York. It has outposts in Austin, Texas, in Chicago, in Miami, in Singapore, and soon in Boston. So it's growing and growing. But there's a lawsuit, which we're reporting on, where a man has attempted to jump into what is called the sprinkle pool. The sprinkle pool is a swimming pool-like play zone, like soft play area, and a grown man has jumped into it and hurt himself, apparently, saying severe and permanent personal injuries, is suing the Museum of Ice Cream because of this, because he says that in their publicity they are advertising that it's it's something to be plunged into, and he's done just that and hurt himself. And actually, there's a TikTok video of somebody else doing exactly the same thing, where they've shown the jump and then shown themselves on crutches. So this is not a rare occurrence, it seems. But anyway, yes, the sprinkle pool is causing problems. I mean, if you look at this thing, it's like, there's pink sprinkles like you would expect to see on ice creams, vast sprinkles like a soft play area, and there's diving boards and a slide and all sorts of other things. So yeah, you can see how somebody might think that it was deeper than it is. So jumped in and hurt themselves.
Can I just point out that I think, what is it, $30 it takes to get in here, and you get one scoop of ice cream for that?
On the publicity it says limitless ice cream, but you get one scoop for free. I think limitless if you want to spend lots of money.
And I also love the fact that the complainant's name is Jeremy Shaw, so Jeremy Very Shaw when it comes to his ankle. Right, quick look at partial collapse of a pyramid.
Yes. So I think this is something which I probably will be talking about a fair amount the more I come on this programme, which is the effect of climate change on heritage. So in Mexico, in Michoacan state, there is the Iguazio archaeological site, and one of the pyramids, pre-Columbian pyramids, has collapsed. And this is after a period of severe drought followed by heavy rains. And for some time now, the Art newspaper has been reporting on this, but also major agencies have been doing reports as well, saying all heritage sites need a plan now. They need an emergency plan for how they are going to deal with the effects of climate change. And this is one example. It's clear that an earlier restoration of the site may not have been particularly effective, and it's used outdated technologies to do so. But the key point is climate change is creating these extreme weather events which are going to affect every form of heritage right across the world. In Europe, there are many sites that are threatened all across the world. There are hugely important, iconic, I'm going to use that word, heritage sites which are desperately under threat from climate change. So this is something which is going to happen more and more.
And can this particular pyramid be repaired?
Yes, they're going to repair it. It's not irreparable. But I think, it's obviously going to cost money. There's an insurance claim that's gone in, etc., etc. It's going to take some time. But I think the thing is, if this is a common thing in Mexico, which we know it is, droughts are very common at the moment. Extreme weather events are very common at the moment. So, the agencies that protect heritage in Mexico and everywhere else in the world are going to be really stretched with this kind of thing in future years.
Ben, thank you very much indeed. That's Ben Luke, and this is The Globalist on Monocle Radio. Now, Hay Festival is partnering Lviv Book Forum, Ukraine's largest book festival, for the third year, co-programming a series of hybrid events and streaming their full schedule to the world from the 3rd to the 6th of October. Well, the CEO of Hay Festival, Julie Finch, joins me now. Julie, good to have you back on the show. How did this unique collaboration between Lviv and Hay come about?
I think, like all great collaborations, they start with people. And obviously what we have in common is the need for freedom of expression and the love of literature and books. So there's a coming together of key people who formed this idea. Our international director was kind of instrumental in brokering the partnership. And we very much felt there was a need to support the Lviv Book Forum at this particular time. So we took the decision to be their digital partner.
I mean, there can't be many book festivals taking place in war zones. Why is Lviv Book Forum continuing to put out their event against all the odds?
I think there's a factor around human survival. Culture and the arts have been intrinsic as part of being human for centuries, and the need for freedom of expression is even more important. And we know that writers and authors are the people who are the truth tellers, but also they help us find solutions to some of the big problems that we're facing in the world, such as war. And it's about human survival, isn't it? At the end of the day, what do we need to take with us as we move forward? It's got to be the arts. It's got to be literature.
Now, past collaborations between Hay Festival and Lviv Book Forum have featured some major names, including Margaret Atwood, Yuval Noah Harari, Alif Shafak, Armanda Iannucci, many more. Without without giving away the full programme, what can people look forward to this year?
Well, I'm not going to give away the full programme at all. I think the point is what we do is bring together well-known people from Europe and from Ukraine to have discussions and debates online, and some in person too. It is a digital festival, so the key point really is to bring audiences in from around the world and to support Lviv Book Forum in their endeavours around self-expression. And the other kind of audience we reach out to is very much thinking around all those refugees who are displaced due to the war in Ukraine. So we find ways to make sure that they can also participate in the festival in October, which is absolutely critical. And I think, there's some brilliant names, but what's key here is the discussion, the importance of the discussion that we're having at this festival with our partners.
Now, last year, communities held live streaming parties and meetups around the festival outside of Ukraine, including a special event at Hay Castle. Will there be more of these pop-ups planned for this year, for this October?
Yeah, we're finding ways to lean into where people from Ukraine will find it most easy to access the festival. And obviously free streaming is very important to those groups in particular. So that's a work in progress at the moment, but we're really committed to our community engagement. And definitely the event at Hay Castle was absolutely brilliant, and the emotion in the room was just incredible. That connection with their homeland is really, really important.
Now, President Zelensky has praised the festival in recent years for its work in sharing these essential Ukrainian stories. What do you think, what is the role that book festivals play in actually changing the world?
I think, as I mentioned earlier, that there's really something about truth. There's something about the long-form discussion and debates, the way in which we understand the world that we live in, and how writers help us to do that because they've studied what's happening. They take different perspectives and different viewpoints, and they help us understand the world from new perspectives. And I think we need that. We need that freedom of expression, and we need to continue to communicate with each other and explore. I mean, one of the most brilliant moments, as you know, Georgina, is how we bring authors together and such occasions and bonds are formed and new ideas are seeded. And that's a really critical part of the arts and literature in the world that we live in at the moment. And it's needed even more than ever before.
And why do you think it is? What is it about writers and their work that means we come to them at our time of need like this?
I think it's so interesting, isn't it, that we live in a fast world. We flick through social media, but actually what a book can do is take you to another place and understand a different viewpoint in a really deep way. And that deep understanding enables people to change their opinions and viewpoints and not become entrenched and very fixed in the world that they live in, and to find new ways of dealing with their own lives, but also understanding the world. And if we don't have that, how do we take the world forward? Where is that expertise and those diverse viewpoints, and how do we find solutions to where we are all going in the world? And then there's the pure joy. We also need joy, and we can often forget that, can't we?
Absolutely, and of course the empathy that literature always generates. Julie, thank you very much indeed. That's Julie Finch there from Hay Festival. And that's all for today's programme. Thanks to our producers, Vincent McAviney, Chris Chomak and Christy O'Grady, our researcher, Sana Jamani, and our studio manager, Steph Chungu. After the headlines, there's more music on the way, and the briefing will be live at midday in London. The Globalist returns at the same time tomorrow, and let me just tell you that our weekend programming will be coming from St Moritz. I'll be there with a number of my colleagues, including Sophie Grove and Nick Manise, and of course Tyler Brule, and we'll be reporting from that wonderful resort all weekend. I'm Georgina Godwin. Thank you for listening.